Distractive fitness shares the belief that exercise sucks, but you got to do it in order to get hot. So we're going to make it a party. We're going to make it distracting with loud music and screaming instructors, a dance party on a bike, flashing lights, so that you get through it. And then over time, you'll have that hot body, and then you'll be happy. So I came into this industry not knowing any of this about fitness because I wasn't a fitness person. I was faced with a really difficult period in the beginning because I realized not only do people not understand what I'm saying, they really dislike it.
This is All Things Fitness and Wellness, hosted by Chrissy Van. Together, we're uniting industry thought leaders and fitfluencers on the mission to inspire innovation and encourage people to live a life fit and well. On today's episode of All Things Fitness and Wellness, we welcome Dr. Michael Hosking, a Ph.D. in biology from Indiana University. As a lifelong athlete and avid cyclist, Dr. Hosking faced a debilitating episode of depression and PTSD in 2010. Rediscovering cycling and embracing mindfulness, he found his path to recovery, leading him to create Revocycle mind and body cycling. In this episode, Dr. Hosking will dive into the neuroscience of exercise, discuss the need for a united approach in the fitness industry regarding GLP-1s and tackling the obesity crisis, and additionally, he'll share insights on how combining mindfulness with physical activity can revolutionize mental health. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new podcast episodes weekly featuring industry thought leaders and influencers. Plus, each week we launch a new edition of This Week in Fitness by ATFW, where we crunch the latest fitness business headlines and research all in under 5 minutes. I'm your host, Chrissy Van, and this is ATFW. First of all, Dr. Hosking, I'm so pleased for you to join me because you came to my attention through a mutual contact we have, Darian Parker, which is obviously a very well-known personal trainer, fellow podcaster. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
I am so happy to be here. And yes, Darian is a master connector in the health and wellness fitness space.
Well, and that's a nice thing. I find many of us here are unified on the same mission to help people understand the social, the physical, the mental benefits of physical activity. And in our conversation today, I was so thrilled to chat with you because I know GLP-1 is something that you're speaking a lot to on LinkedIn. So we're going to learn a little bit about the why behind that later in the conversation. But I want to learn about you first. And I understand lifelong athlete. So where did your love affair with fitness really begin?
Well, it's a good question, and I love to answer because I will start by saying I don't consider myself a fitness person. I have been an athlete my entire life. I have created a brand for people to exercise, but I do not consider myself a fitness person. I consider myself an athlete. I consider myself a person that teaches movement as a meditation. I consider myself a person that teaches exercise for holistic well-being and mental health. And we can dive into this more deeply if you're interested, but I have started to define really strong cultural differences between athleticism and fitness. I call fitness culture fitnessy, and I call athletics athleticism. And there's a difference. And I didn't quite realize that until I created a brand trying to attract people in fitness. And I realized they do not resonate with what I'm telling them.
Tell me a little bit about what you found, because I am interested. I mean, it's a statement right out of the gate saying, I'm not a fitness person, whereas we blanket term it. So do explain.
Sure. Let's go back a little bit. So as an athlete, I've been an athlete since I was probably 6 years old. I've done every major sport there is, and some at a really high level. So I've always loved movement. I've always loved athletics. I've always loved the feeling of getting better at something or being fully in the moment, the flow state that athletics can give you. And I created Revocycle mind and body cycling as a way to teach people about those things, about being in the moment through movement, tuning into the body, being aware of the breath, because it has been profoundly impactful in my life. And I had discovered at the time that, exercise profoundly influences the brain. There's an entire body of research now on exercise in the brain. And I had just discovered that in around 2010. And I just wanted to share this with the world. I wanted to share with people how exercise can help with mental health or other brain issues, and that you can do it mindfully, and you can do it in a way that is after the flow state and quieting the mind. Those were my beliefs. That's what I brought. I discovered that fitness didn't really care about any of that. And I realized, even though I've been going to gym since I was 12, and of course, being an athlete since I was 6, that my perspective was not that of fitness. And I came to understand fitness as a thing that people pursue in order to change how their body looks. And the hope that once the body changes into the socially constructed ideal, then they will be happy. So it's an indirect pursuit of happiness through exterior changes in the body. Therefore, workouts are measured by how well they can get your body to change. How many calories are burned? What muscles do you build? Orange Theory Fitness, burning calories all day long. This is why our workout is better. And I came to really grasp that most people come into fitness not because they like movement, but because they want a better body. And that fitness or exercise is something they have to do in order to get that better body. So there's a real sense that we don't like exercise, we don't like movement, but we got to do it in order to get hot. And then once I'm hot, I'll be happy. That's the path. So fitness then recognizes that people don't like to do it. And in group fitness in particular, you often see what I call distractive fitness. It's a term I coined. Distractive fitness shares the belief that exercise sucks, but you got to do it in order to get hot. So we're going to make it a party. We're going to make it distracting with loud music and screaming instructors, a dance party on a bike, flashing lights, so that you get through it. And then over time, you'll have that hot body, and then you'll be happy. So I came into this industry not knowing any of this about fitness because I wasn't a fitness person. I was a fit person and I was an athlete. And so I was faced with a really difficult period in the beginning because I realized not only do people not understand what I'm saying, they really dislike it. They really dislike it. I mean, my poor instructors. People would walk out of their classes. People would yell at my instructors. They'd yell at me and tell me I know nothing about cycling, when in fact I've done it for 30 years. And I was just confused. Like, what is going on here? Why are they mad? I can't understand this. And then I grasped it. Our classes are taught like a yoga class. Space, body awareness, calm instruction, cues to tune into the body or the breath, tuning into the muscles working, but space.
Yeah.
And that made people super, super uncomfortable.
It's interesting though, because I mean, I don't disagree with you because I grew up in 90s, early 2000s. Diet culture was rampant. What was shoved down my throat and also what was portrayed in the media as the ideals is shocking when you reverse and you even hear the language that they used about it. So, especially as a young woman, you internalize that. And for sure, those are the types of goals and ideals that you're seeking in those spaces. So, I 1000% agree with that. I do feel, and maybe you see this, maybe you don't, but what you're speaking to now, more and more individuals seem to be seeking that understanding of the mental health connection. Like, even in these last few years post COVID, especially, I feel like people are more in tune. Have you been finding the same?
100%. 100%. And I want to just reinforce what you said. The 90s were horrific.
So bad.
For diet culture. And I mean, I follow multiple creators on Instagram who are anti-diet fitness people or intuitive eating dietitians or body image specialists. And they show clips from the 90s television shows and the 90s ads. And I can't believe that was happening. And I don't, by the way, blame people for internalizing these values. That's what they were told. That was the culture.
That was your value in the culture, is if you looked like
Oh,
X or Y.
100%, 100%. So I don't blame people for this. And I'm not judging people who internalize those values. But to your second part, yes, yes, exercise for mental health has skyrocketed in the last 4 years. Exercise as a meditative or mindfulness-based practice has really come into the fore. So, in 2012, when I'm talking about these things, people are, what is this? Yes, body positive fitness, body neutral fitness, right? All of those were just little silos that no one was in but me in 2012 or 13. And now they're growing. Each of those is growing. And it's really, really nice to see. Yes. And, COVID, I think we'll look back at COVID, we in the fitness industry will look back at COVID as a time when everything changed because gyms were closed, studios couldn't function, people had to go online, people were suffering from stress and anxiety and mental health issues. And suddenly everyone was talking about mental health.
The stigma shift was massive because before that really, anytime there was mental health month or mental health week, it was just about building awareness and break the stigma. But I don't think anyone really, unless they'd experienced anything, fully grasped what they were talking about. And to your point about culture in media in like 90s and 2000s, think of even in early 2000s television. If somebody went to a therapist in a television show, they would say, "Oh, you went to see a shrink." Like that was still the mentality not that long ago.
Yeah, let me tell you a little anecdote. When I created Revocycle Mind and Body Cycling, based on my understanding of mindful movement, meditative movement, and the science of exercise in the brain, and science exercise for mental health, my original goal was to create a place where psychologists and psychiatrists and primary care doctors would refer patients newly diagnosed with mild to moderate depression. I would be the fitness pharmacist or the fitness therapist, and I would then serve that prescription, and we would communicate. I would report back to the referrer. We'd track their attendance and their time and their feelings. That was the original goal. And after talking to many insurance companies at the time and psychotherapists and psychiatrists, that just wasn't the time. The insurance companies couldn't grasp what I was suggesting to them. They had no idea about the science because it was relatively new then. And medical doctors just, what? I don't know anything about this. There's nothing was going on in that space. So I just changed it to, we're just going to be mindful movement for mental health and holistic well-being. But this is now becoming a thing. Exercise prescription is now becoming a thing. In the UK, even then, in the UK, 50% or so of people newly diagnosed with mild to moderate depression were being referred to a 12-week exercise program.
Incredible.
They were way ahead of us.
It's how it should be. And I mean, I know it was Dr. Ben Singh out of the University of South Wales in Australia that had that massive study about it being more effective than your traditional medications that are often handed out in the first course of action for depression and anxiety. And it's interesting that you highlight this because I just interviewed a woman. Her episode went up today. And she was talking about in her early 20s, she was 21 and diagnosed as pre-diabetic. And at the time, she was prescribed metformin right out of the gate. And it wasn't really working or doing what it was supposed to do over the first few months. And then it was months later where then the doctor was like, "Oh, like you should do nutrition and exercise too." Yeah. And it was like the second course of action. Yes. Whereas now we know if you go to a doctor and you're in that situation, they're going to say exercise for that physical. And to your point, it sounds like the shift, thank goodness, is happening, not as quickly as we would like, but that mental health recognition is happening. Before we dive more into the science of that, I'm curious on the personal note, because you mentioned when you created this, it's because you understood personally that it had a profound impact on you. So what did that look like?
in 2008 to 10 time period, I went through a very serious, I'm looking at the books that I bought during this time. I went through a very serious depressive episode and PTSD episode. And this was related to childhood SA, I'll call it. And I was struggling. I was seeing a psychiatrist once a week, taking every known combination of antidepressants over a 2 to 3 year period in multiple different doses. I was taking anti-anxiety drugs on top of that. And then we had a little of the atypical antipsychotics on top of all that. I was under a really heavy dose of medications. And I was seeing a therapist once, sometimes twice a week. And even during that time, I went to a psychiatric hospital in Arizona called Sarah Tucson, which sounds worse than it is. This is a beautiful place in the desert. It's got a pool. It's walking past labyrinth. It wasn't a horrible place, but it was a psychiatric hospital, and they did have gates.
Mm-hmm.
And so after 2 years of these medications and going to the hospital, I had quit a job. I was national director of curriculum for profit online education company. I had many hundreds of people below me, a budget of $1 million to $2 million. I quit that. For 2 years, laid in bed or on that couch right over there, doing nothing. And one day I went to my psychiatrist and she said, Michael, I don't know what to do for you. I've never seen anything like this. I think I'm going to put you on lithium. And I didn't know much about lithium at the time, but it sounded super scary to me. I knew it was old. I knew it was used in movies in the 50s or 60s, right? And it sounded super scary to me. And I remember coming home that day thinking, what has my life come to? I'm a smart person. I'm a reasonably nice person. I try to treat people well. And I'm now going to be on lithium, doing nothing, because I knew what lithium does, right? And I thought, I got to do something. What can I do? And the three passions in my life are playing my guitars, listening to my stereo and records, and riding my bike. I hadn't done any of those in 2.5 years.
Wow.
So I decided that day I would ride my bike. But of course, when you're really experiencing depression, the thought of gathering your cycling jersey, your shorts, your tools, putting air in the tires, and actually even just going out is really too much. So I did the little stair-step method and I said, all right, today, find your jersey, which I did, go to bed. Next day, find your shorts. Next day, socks. Next day, shoes. And over a period of 5 days, I got all my stuff together. And the only thing left to do was put air in the tires. So I did that and thought, well, let's go for a ride. And I did. And it was 4 miles in total, which if you know anything about cycling, that it's not even a warm-up. It's not even close. And it was 2 miles out, 2 miles back. And I sat on my couch and thought, I feel kind of good. I don't know what this is. I think I'll try it tomorrow. 2 miles out, 2 miles back next day. And the next. Then 4 miles. Then 6. And I went to my psychiatrist the next week and I said, Ashley, we were on a first name basis. I said, Ashley, I'm feeling better. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to stop taking these drugs and keep riding my bike. And her eyes just got huge because she's like, Michael, I don't recommend that. I'll never forget those words. Michael, I do not recommend that. And I said, I'm going to do it. And I'll do it right. I'll taper off these drugs. I'll taper into whatever. And I did. I stopped taking the drugs and I kept riding my bike. And at that point, being a biologist, a PhD scientist, I thought, what is going on? And that's when I started to dive into the science of exercise and the brain and exercise for mental health.
I just want to say out of the gate how much I appreciate people like yourselves that are willing to be vulnerable and share stories like that, because that right there is where change happens. So first of all, thank you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You're welcome. And I don't even consider it vulnerable now. I know why people do. But in the early days when I'd give these talks, I mean, I remember once giving a talk for a health food company here in town that has a wellness series. And I was talking about that time in the hospital and my depression, and I was nearly crying in front of all these people relating that story.
Of course.
I've spoken to the Rotary Club, and I remember nearly crying and being so embarrassed that I'm now going to cry. Oh my God, Michael, get it together. But you know what?
That's the human. I like the amount that we need more of that, because that's how people connect, is that level of realness. And I think especially in the era of like digital society and things like that, we miss that a lot. So as I say, there's just, whether you view it as vulnerable or not, that it's a gift to people. And I just want to fully acknowledge that, because that is a gift. So thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
On that note, obviously, as you say, the seed is planted because you're like, this has made a tremendous impact for me. And now, especially the fact, as you say, PhD, scientist, you have this deep curiosity. So what were you all of a sudden discovering when it came to that scientific connection between brain and body? What are you hoping people actually understand about what's happening here?
Well, let me tell you just a little background, if I might, around.
Yeah, please.
I finished my PhD in around 1998 or so. If I had gone through the Department of Biology at Indiana University, which is a gigantic building, 5-6 stories tall, very famous biologists have come from there. In fact, the discoverer of the DNA double helix structure did his graduate work there. If I had walked through that building and said that vertebrates, or animals with vertebrae, or humans in particular, could grow new neurons in their brain, they would have walked me to the front door and said, your fellowship is over.
Yeah.
Nice to know you. It was dogma that you can't grow new neurons in vertebrates in the brain. You just can't. You get a whole bunch of them when you're young. Synapses sprout and proliferate during certain periods when you're young, or maybe even teenage years. And when you learn, of course, new synapses are created and cemented, fire together, wire together, that kind of thing. But you can't grow new neurons. You can only destroy them through, traumatic brain injury or drugs or alcohol or whatever, right? So the idea that you could grow new neurons was unheard of in 1998. And yet when I started diving into the science of why exercise was helping me with my depression and PTSD, I was finding articles talking about new neurons growing in humans. And in fact, I'll never forget, I came across some papers in cancer research where scientists had injected patients with a dye that went to cells that were rapidly undergoing mitosis, which is cell division, right? Which is what cancer cells do. So the dye would go to areas of a great deal of mitosis in the body, which would be a tumor. So they would inject the dye to try to visualize the tumors. And some of the patients, of course, would pass away. And they were finding the dye in the brain. And they said, at first, clearly we've made a mistake here somewhere. But they kept finding it. And they thought, are there cells undergoing mitosis, i.e. replicating, i.e. new cells in the brain? And it became clear that, in fact, that was happening in the brain. And, at the same time, a guy earlier when I was in graduate school, a guy had come to our department, a very famous researcher who studied birds and learning songs in particular. And he had found new neurons growing in the brains of these birds when they learn new songs. But in 1998, we're going, wait, this doesn't make sense. I mean, like, it didn't register. And then I went back to look at that paper when I was doing this reading in 2008 or 10, and I was like, oh my God, he told us about this in 1998. So there was this whole kind of growth of the understanding that neurons can in fact be created de novo in the brain. And that then became of great interest to molecular biologists, people who just want to study the mechanisms of nerves and how they function and how they are born. And these researchers discovered by accident that the mice or the rats in their labs that had running wheels in their cages, And they would sacrifice the animals. I'm not a fan. I'm not a proponent of this. I don't like
Right.
it. But they would
But
sacrifice.
it's a very real reality that happens.
Reality. They would sacrifice the animals, and the ones that had the running wheels had more nerves being born in the brains. And they're like, well, we don't care why this is. We just care that it is. So they made sure to give them all running wheels and give them running all the time. So they get more nerves to study. It was just by happenstance. But other people then were like, why is this?
Yeah.
Why is running creating new nerve cells in the brain? And then a whole new field sprung up.
Incredible. When it comes to how exercise actually impacts depression or anxiety, what exactly is happening there?
It's a subject of a great deal of research right now. But here's what we do know. We do know that aerobic exercise in particular, but also likely strength training, but aerobic exercise is the most studied. Aerobic exercise is very good at creating neurogenesis in the brain. And neurogenesis just means the creation of new neurons. So aerobic exercise is very good at neurogenesis, at creating neurogenesis in the brain. That neurogenesis happens mostly in a part of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a part of the brain associated with learning and memory. Now, you might recall I told you about a guy studying bird brains, right?
Yep.
And new growth. It was in the hippocampus of the bird brains that he saw the new they were learning a new song. So the hippocampus is associated with learning. It's associated with memory. It's connected to the amygdala, which is associated with the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And those two together help us make sense of the world, look out for dangerous things, remember things. But it also, the hippocampus in particular, is a site of depression. There are morphological differences in the hippocampus of people with depression and also with PTSD. The amygdala is more associated with PTSD, but together they function kind of together. So aerobic exercise promotes neurogenesis in the brain, in a particular part of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the site of depression, and there are morphological, physical differences in the structure of the hippocampus in people with depression versus people without depression. So it appears that aerobic exercise helps depression by promoting neurogenesis in the hippocampus of the brain.
Well, and to your point, so much research is happening in this space. So, especially in your shoes as somebody that's been looking at this before everyone was looking at this must be a pretty exciting time and field for yourself to see. I mean, imagine there's a ton of collaboration as well taking place in the community.
You know, I read one time long ago that new research in medicine takes about 17 years to get into practice. Right? Publish your paper 17 years later, someone might actually start doing that thing in their practice. It has a lot of energy in academia. There's a great deal of research going on now in that. And the researchers are speaking to each other. And that is slowly penetrating, I would say, to the highest levels of the fitness industry. So brand leaders and executives are starting to notice that exercise for mental health is a real thing. But I don't see it yet getting down into, the operations level. It's definitely not making it to the messaging and marketing level. And it certainly is not making it to greeting the new customer when they walk in the door level. But it is starting to penetrate the industry. And yes, it's really exciting. There's a guy, Dr. Brendan Stubbs. Yeah, I think he's in the UK. He and I communicated the other day on LinkedIn. He's been teaching about exercise for mental health and exercise in the brain since 2010. And I said to him, you beat me by about 2 years. But he's considered the guy that's been talking about this the longest. And he is. But, he just posted the other day on LinkedIn that, I'm teaching about this every year at multiple conferences to medicine, and it's like they didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at medical conferences, and they don't know what I'm telling them. So we have a ways to go, but it is exciting to see interest in it growing.
Yeah, I think a ways to go and not to get political about it, but I would imagine some maybe uphill battles as well, because unfortunately, medication is often the first course of treatment, and there might not necessarily be all parties that love that there is an alternative to try or at least integrate first.
Not a lot of money to be made in the pharmaceutical industry if you start referring people to exercise.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen that from the physical side too, which is kind of lead us in our next conversation about GLP-1 in a moment. But I find you fascinating. And there was one other thing you said that I can't move forward until I explore further. But because I'm somebody that really subscribes to flow state, that's honestly, actually, I get some of my best ideas in my workouts to the
Yeah.
point I actually keep a notebook in my gym bag, but maybe haven't always necessarily understood why I say to people, it's such a creative space to me. And I overheard you say it when you were talking about what you were doing in that cycling space. So, what is happening to allow us to tap into that state of flow? And perhaps for those that maybe hear state of flow and think it's more of this like pseudoscientific or woo woo comment, help them understand what we mean by that.
Well, yeah, the word flow. You know what I think of when I hear the word flow? You know what the first thing I think of is Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And I remember him describing once a basketball game where he didn't remember the last whatever minutes of a half or a quarter. He says, I don't, it's the state of fully being in the moment where you're no longer thinking, no longer judging, no longer worried about the future, regretting the past. You are fully in the moment and responding. And to an athlete, that is the most beautiful thing you can ever experience. So it's a type, in my mind, I think of it as a type of meditation. It's a state one might get into when you are deeply engaged in something. So we often think of meditation as sitting still, quieting the mind. I think of flow as doing something that fully engages us. And for me, it could be my guitars here when hours will go by. It could be riding my bike, hours will go by. It could be listening to a record, whole side go by. And what? Okay. It's a doing. Flow to me comes from doing. Now, the person who coined the term, how do you say his name? I don't know exactly how to say his name. Do you know? It's Csikszentmihalyi is how I'll say it. Mihaly
I don't know personally. So,
Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He's a Hungarian, and he coined the term flow. And he described it as that state where you're fully absorbed in the activity. And there are certain conditions that are required. One is that it not be too easy, because then you get bored. It can't be too hard, because then you get frustrated. So it has to be at a proper level of challenge for you. So you feel like you can do it, but it takes focus and concentration. And in that state, in that position, you can then get into the flow state. And by the way, it could be riding a motorcycle.
yeah, which I do actually. I was just as you were saying that, I was like, that is what I love so much about it.
I love that. I didn't know you rode a motorcycle. What is it?
I have a Ducati Scrambler.
Oh my God. Love it. Italian bikes. So yes, motorcyclists, people that know motorcyclists listening, go ask them why they love what they do. And they will tell you because they feel so fully in the moment. And also they feel so fully part of the environment around them.
Yes.
Smelling the earth, smelling the trees, feeling the wind. I used to have a motorcycle when I was a professor at Davidson, and absolutely motorcycling will get you into the flow state, especially a curvy road.
Oh, yeah. Nothing better.
Yeah. So flow is doing something that requires your attention that's moderately difficult. You can do it, but it's a challenge. And that gets you into this sort of meditative state that we call flow.
Yeah, it's so incredible to think that we can do that through movement in our bodies. And I think it's wonderful that through what you do, you're helping people actually tap into that because it is such a powerful state of being for us. Now, I know we started the conversation off by saying on LinkedIn, you've been very vocal about GLP-1 and looking to gather a community together so that everyone can be very informed because this is a huge industry that's exploding. Everyone's trying to get a piece of it. Nestle just announced yesterday, once again, oh, they got their food brand and now they have their health sciences brand. It's like, how do we get the money? And I've been very vocal on this podcast because I have a couple feelings about it. And at the end of the day, the dollars don't care about my feelings. But my dad was a type 1 diabetic. We know autoimmune. And there was really, nothing that could be done. He had a lot of side effects that I watched him deal with. And I know when it comes to the obesity epidemic or lack of physical activity, type 2 diabetes is a condition that is preventable. And so we know that's why these medications were initially developed. I do feel they have a place because we do have this obesity crisis. Absolutely. If this is what's going to help break the barriers, absolutely. I do see it a lot being touted as a vanity industry, which I'm like, it is what it is. I get it. But I'm like, regardless if people are going to decide to do it, I do feel like this industry is the destination that makes a lot of sense to actually align with it versus some of the other players that are trying to come in. So those are my 2 cents on the kind of scope of what's happening. But I would love to know, because for you, obviously very research based. So you're trying to make people be informed. But where sparked the interest, first of all, of getting the communication flowing on this?
Well, you might recall. Well, actually, I don't think I told you this. I'm going to tell you that a fundamental point in forming my creation of Revocycle mind and body cycling was an experience I had with an ex-partner of mine when I was at Davidson College. She was recovering from an eating disorder. She was back to normal weight, but her brain still had those thoughts. I'd never known anyone with an eating disorder. I'd never thought about them. And we would go grocery shopping together, and she'd point out the women's magazines by the checkout stand called Women's Health or Health and Fitness. But marketing, hot body, six pack, build a booty, tone the shoulders. She says, you see those? I used to buy those, go in, take the photos, hang them on my wall as inspiration to not eat more.
Mm.
I used to go to the gym for 5 hours at a time. And that was in my head when I created Revocycle Mind and Body Cycling. And I made a commitment to myself, and I communicated this to every employee. We will never talk about bodies. We will never talk about bikini season. We will never have a new year, new you promotion. We will not do 30-day challenges to see how many classes you can get in 30 days. We won't talk about calories burned. Body neutral, body agnostic, or more commonly, body positive fitness, right? So that was just part of who we were, who I am. And so we were a welcoming place to people in larger bodies, and they would hug me and cry to learn our values. They would cry. And it's really important to me. The shaming and the judgment of the fitness industry has always been of deep concern to me. And they judge and shame. Everyone's got the same 24 hours. If you want it bad enough, you'll get it.
Yeah, to be honest, like I've spoken about this before. I did fitness competitions years ago, and I was like a guilty party.
Oh,
Like
sure.
my shift has completely transformed for similar reasons when I realized the impact on mental health. But like I was grew up on damaging rhetoric,
Yep.
repeated damaging rhetoric without question.
And is to be expected because that's what you were taught and that's what you knew. And it served you, right? In some fashion, it served you then. It doesn't now because you learned and you grew. And I love that. That's the story that I want to create for other people as well. So all of that is part of who I am and part of the Revocycle Mind and Body Cycling brand. So when I saw, say, 5 months ago, this explosion of these weight loss drugs into the fitness space, I saw major brands buying drug prescription companies. I saw major brands creating their own drug prescription sections. And I saw fitness people all over talking about these drugs and creating programs for these people. And I, for about 5 minutes, argued vehemently against the fitness industry getting involved with these drugs. And there were 2 reasons for that. One, I care about people with obesity, and I know that they're going to be greeted with judgment and shame by trainers who are attracted to fitness culture in the first place. People attracted to fitness culture, which judges and shames fat and fat people, people attracted to that culture share those values. That's why it's a culture. So I just thought, oh my word, these people who have avoided the fitness industry in many cases for decades because of the judgment and shaming are now going to be told by their doctors to come into the industry, or they're being lured into it by fitness brands promoting workout programs for them. And I just thought, this is not going to go well. This is going to hurt them even more. And then I also thought, I'm not sure your average fitness trainer even knows what the letters GLP stand for. And if I told them it's glucagon-like peptide, I don't know if they would know what glucagon was. And I thought, we have so little training in the industry and such a cultural issue that I think this is going to be a disaster. So for 5 minutes, I argued against this on LinkedIn. And like, what is it, the Dutch boy in the dam? I was like, no, I can't stop this. Therefore, I can help mitigate harm. And by the way, help the industry. Because as we both know, and maybe your listeners don't, the industry has reached around 20 to 25% of the population for 40 to 50 years.
Yep. It's always the question, how do you get the other 80?
Yes. And if you interview or survey 1,000 random Americans and ask them if exercise is good for their health, 100% will say, yes, it is. So that message has gotten through. Exercise is good for your health. Everyone knows it. So how is an industry that's selling a service that everyone knows is good for their health getting only 20 to 25% of the population? My argument is that it's their messaging and the marketing.
Which I'll pause you for a second because
Sure.
I don't disagree. It's exactly what we spoke to, and the 30-day challenges and the ripped abs. I will say there has been a shift that I've definitely noticed.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
there is that realization you're not speaking to the future consumers. And I think with the research, there is more understanding. And I do think as well, like the young guns that are kind of coming up are seeing the sins of our past. And so may not identify as much with those old messages. So like, I think there's actually a lot of hope in that space that's
Culture
happening.
shift.
Yeah,
Culture shift. Yeah.
absolutely.
And it takes poking and prodding, and it
Yes.
takes people giving weird talks that no one can make sense of, right? Exactly. And what you're doing. So when I realized that there's no stopping this in the industry, and given my concerns about culture and how they're going to meet people with obesity and the knowledge of their average trainer in the industry, I thought, well, let's mitigate the harm. How can we do that? I believe we can do that by bringing researchers and practitioners who work with the drugs in academia, who work with patients in the clinic, with behavioral health specialists, with motivational specialists, with exercise physiologists, with insurance plan experts, with HR experts. If we can bring in experts that surround the patient, new to fitness and taking these medications, bring them together, chop down the silos, and then bring in fitness industry leaders into a space where we communicate with each other, share insights, share experiences, share practices, share research in a learning community. We can promote rapid and I think potentially powerful change in the industry quickly, because we've broken down silos and we're getting the information directly to fitness brand leaders who can then trickle that down to their regional managers, their district managers, and their staff. So my hope with this group I'm putting together, I'm calling it Weight Loss Medications and Fitness Mastermind Group. My hope is that we break down silos amongst the researchers, advance their careers and their understanding, and also we share that directly with fitness industry leaders so that they can then bring it to their organizations.
Yeah, because to your point, and I've thought this as well, because I spoke with a gentleman from Obesity Canada a couple of months ago, and he had had bariatric surgery and similar but different experience that your friend that you spoke to there. But he was like, all of a sudden, I've had this big shift, and it's been this physical shift, and I look in the mirror, and everything looks different, but my brain feels the same. And there's this voice that's not so nice inside my brain that's still repeating these things too. So, how crucial do you think it will be? Because there are, as we know in the industry, already programs underway. How crucial is the understanding of what's happening in the mind going to be for the success of the consumers that do walk in the door and decide to go this route?
I think it's absolutely critical that we understand the mindset of a person living with obesity in America in 2024. In order to do that, we need to understand our culture. When we do that, we will understand messages that have been imprinted in our brains from Hollywood, from fitness, from the diet companies, from the beauty industry. Once we have grasped all that, we can better understand where that patient is. And I'm speaking to the biopsychosocial aspects of obesity. And therefore, I think it's critical. I think we will not be successful with these patients. And I call them patients. They're not clients in the fitness industry anymore. These are patients. These are people taking a powerful drug, acting on a very fundamental system in the body, who are now coming to exercise as part of the treatment for a disease. These are patients, and we need to see them as patients. But I think if we don't understand their mindset, we will not be successful with them. That requires us, we in the industry, to then change our own mindsets and have some empathy. And that's a cultural shift. And that's one of the things I hope to facilitate, a rapid cultural shift within fitness by bringing these experts and these fitness brand leaders who can then communicate those changed values and understanding down quickly into the organizations. But I think it's absolutely, absolutely critical, because obesity is the most stigmatized disease in America. I'm trying to think of another one. I mean, depression, mental health issues, stigmatized. But people with obesity suffer from mental health issues as well, partially because of their condition. So I think it's absolutely critical. I'll leave it at that.
How has the response been as you've started to gather? Because obviously you are widely connected and it's 2024, so we're connected globally as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm just a nobody in fitness, really. I mean, I'm just a guy that accidentally found himself in fitness, who loves cycling, who learned about exercising the brain, mindful movement, meditation, peace, happiness, and tried to teach that to people. People like Darian, he knows everyone, right? And I'm kind of a quiet guy normally in social media, and I just share my thoughts. And I am astounded at the meetings people will give me. And within 20 minutes of having a Zoom call with someone I have never met before, someone who is up here in their field at some regional medical center or at a very well-known academic institution, will immediately say, yes, we need this. Yes, you are right. And I want to be a part of it. And then I say, would you be okay if I put your name on the landing page of this learning community? And they say yes. So every person I've spoken with says, absolutely necessary. And yes, I will be a part of this.
Well, I find generally when we're on the right track of something, that's when the doors all of a sudden open a little bit easier than we expected without even a creak. So, I mean, you're obviously fulfilling a need in the space, and it's it's happened so quickly. It's changing so quickly. The research is coming out as we're going. So I think it's imperative that everybody is on the same page. And also there's so much noise in the space. It's important to find avenues to like cut through it, have it science backed. And ultimately the trickle down effect will happen if it's fitness leaders from the top down, then their staff that are the ones that ultimately are greeting this individual in a life-changing decision will be able to navigate that in a way that it's going to be safe and effective, which I know is the goal at the end of the day.
Totally.
Before we wrap up here, I love to leave people on a little nugget of wisdom to fuel our day. It could either be a great lesson you've learned along the way or something that you just want to really drive home. So what would that be for you?
In 1997 or 98, I was a mountain bike racer and a road bike racer, and friends of mine and I all drove up from Bloomington, Indiana to Sleeping Bear Dunes in Michigan, which is on the very top of what do they call it? My friends from Michigan always do this. It's at the very top of the hand. And it is a very sandy soil up there. And we all drove up and camped out the night before. And my race was supposed to be around 10. We got up early, had a little something to eat. It was 100 degrees that day. A bunch of different classes went through the course before me. Things got behind schedule. I didn't start my race till 1 a.m. and it was over 100 at that point. And I hadn't eaten since 7 or 8. And I slept in a tent. And I started that race. And by that point, the course was just pure beach sand. I mean, if you've ever tried to ride a bike in beach sand, you will know that you get about 12 inches with each pedal stroke. And by the end of the first 6-mile lap, I was out of water. The water people had left because it was too hot. And I had 2 to 3 more laps. And by the second lap, I was seeing stars. And I don't recommend this to anyone because that's unhealthy at that point. But I remember thinking, I'm going to finish this race. And it's too much to think about the 12 miles I have left. But I can think about the next pedal stroke. And then the next. And the next. And before any of this in my life, I discovered being in the moment, taking it one step at a time. Focus on the next pedal stroke. Celebrate. Focus, celebrate, become in the moment, and just focus on the next step. And that lesson has stayed with me. And when things get hard, I think about that. I used to teach that in my cycling classes to people. I was just like, just the next pedal stroke. That's all that matters. When you're going up a hill, it's not the top, it's the next 4 feet.
Dr. Hosking, thank you so much. I really appreciate a conversation where, number one, we got to learn a lot about the root of your why with what you do, why you continue to do and advocate, and also some tremendous education within the mix. So I really appreciate you making the time for me today.
Oh, I so love these conversations. Thank you for inviting me.
You've just listened to the All Things Fitness and Wellness podcast, hosted by Chrissy Van. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new podcast episodes weekly featuring industry insiders and influencers. Together, we're on a mission for everyone to live a life fit and well.